Guess who started that Kamala was sleeping to the top? Bernie Sanders, love.
That is not true. Firstly, Cole is a mutual, and I really like his content and really respect what he does. But this video did include some inaccuracies, and I don't think that that's entirely his fault because I've been seeing similar ones crop up all of a sudden. The reason I started looking into this is because if these claims are true, I want to know that. We all should. But I ended up going down a fact-checking rabbit hole because there's something pretty interesting happening. Let me make this perfectly clear. You can criticize Bernie Sanders. I have no problem with that, but you don't need to spread misinformation to do so. If your point is a good one, you don't need lies to make it. And in fact, I think lies or accidental misinformation weaken the point you make. So you may have heard that Bernie Sanders got some criticism because of some comments he made on a podcast recently. I decided to track down the podcast clip, not to defend Bernie on anything that he said, but just to know exactly what we were all dealing with here. And I'm glad I did because I noticed that there were a lot of jump cuts in the version that's been circulating. The clip that was edited and shared, which is now making the rounds, cut out a lot. So I'm gonna edit back in the clips of the words that they cut out. Anywhere where they cut silences, I'll leave. Vertical clips come from the edited down version. The horizontal ones are the stuff they cut out.
We have a question we want to ask about what happened to you in 2016 with this Bernie Bros movement. Your followers are seeing they have a racism problem, a misogyny problem. Do you think that's a super PAC thing behind that?
That was the Democratic establishment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was just, they were sitting there. We had a lot of young people. We had people of color, and they create this kind of myth with the help of the corporate media and all that stuff.
It's kind of interesting. During this election, the podcast space, which the Democrats largely avoided, they feel had some influence in the election, and they started to label us the podcast bros and said that we were sexist and we were racist and bigoted. It's almost like it's the exact same strategy to get you out of there.
Yeah, that's what the liberal elite does. They run away. Look, again, I would hope that everybody who's watching the program is that we as a nation have got to end all forms of bigotry, right?
Yes.
And I start off as a basic assumption.
Unless it's to your close friends, right?
Yeah, whether it's racism or sexism, homophobia or xenophobia, whatever it is. But, liberal Democrats talk about that all the time. And then you get to what we call identity politics.
Yeah.
You're black, you're wonderful, you're tremendous, you're gay, you're the greatest human being on earth. And rather than say, what do you stand for?
Exactly.
You're gay, that's fine, who cares?
Yeah.
Well, what do you stand for?
Yeah.
Is every gay person brilliant and wonderful and great? No, of course not. Everybody's a human being.
Yeah.
So the issue is what you stand for, which gets you back to what we discussed earlier. Class politics of which side are you on? Are you going to stand with working families? Are you going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage or not? Are you going to fight to guarantee health care to all people or not? Are you going to demand that the wealthiest people start paying their fair share of taxes or not? Those are the issues. I know what cares what color you are, what gender is, et cetera, et cetera.
As I'm sure you've noticed, they cut out any mention that Bernie Sanders makes calling out bigotry of any form, as well as him pointing out that his supporters, in fact, included a lot of people of color, which I'll get back to. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I'm fairly certain that most people who are reacting negatively to Bernie Sanders' comments are reacting to the edited down version, because that is the version that is available on the vertical apps when you look it up. Again, I am not saying that you cannot criticize Bernie for his comments. I agree. Bernie should not have made it that easy, allowing them to suggest that the very real accusations are just identity politics. But Bernie himself, in the part that was deleted, draws a clear line between fighting bigotry and identity politics. When he brings up and condemns bigotry of any form, he also does it in a way that is not up for debate. He basically is I'm going to assume that we all know and agree that we all have to fight against that. And I think there is something to be said for not allowing the podcast bros to debate something like that. I think it's also really important to note that the question he was asked was about his 2016 campaign. Not only do I think that that means that maybe these sound bites were ones that they were aiming for, it also helps us understand what Bernie was talking about when he first started answering the question. This is another reason why I say I don't think it's Cole's and other people like him's fault for reacting to this clip this way. Because the people who I've seen talking about this all seem to be early, maybe mid-20s. People that age, while politically involved now, were most likely not paying close attention to what was going on in the DNC 10 years ago. In fact, I know this to be true about Cole because we talked about this very thing a few weeks ago. He posted a video of himself asking Debbie Wasserman Schultz a question. And I pointed out in his comments respectfully that, hey, she's the reason for a lot of things that are wrong with the DNC right now. And someone else jumped in and said, hey, she literally gave us Trump in 2016. He reached out to me directly and was like, hey, I had no idea who she was and I had no time to look her up. Maybe I should take down the video. And I said, don't take down the video because it's worth asking her about other issues because she's a rep. And then we had a great chat. But he basically said, I was too young in 2016 to really know what was going on, which is perfectly understandable. That's probably true for a lot of people who are getting involved now who weren't involved then. So who is Debbie Wasserman Schultz? She is the DNC chair who, when the DNC email leak occurred back in 2016, was caught favoring Hillary's campaign over Bernie's, despite claiming neutrality. Emails talk about narratives about his campaign that they can push. Among those discussions between top aides on how to use his atheism, if not his Jewish heritage, against him, using identity politics When Bernie talks about the Dem establishment or the liberal elite, this is what he's referring to. And he's not wrong. He was targeted. There are emails proving this. From the beginning, the plan was that he was not going to be president. That's Debbie saying that. Despite almost every single poll having him favored to beat Trump in the general, almost always by double digits. Hillary also had to counter the narrative about her past racism. The 1994 crime bill that Bill Clinton had signed was incredibly harmful to black communities, which he later apologized for. Hillary made a statement at the time calling the kids targeted by the bill super predators, talking about bringing them to heel. Hillary basically accused him of racism for suggesting that a primary for Obama's second term would not be a bad idea. She equated him to a Republican, despite the fact that she ran against Obama. Hillary Clinton, wonderful as she may be, ran on identity politics. Her campaign slogan was literally, "I'm with her," which tells me nothing. She also had Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright help her push this idea, with Madeleine Albright saying that the real revolution would be having the first female president, saying there's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other. Hillary literally applauded while standing there. Then Gloria Steinem, feminist icon, went on Bill Maher's show and said that the only reason that younger women preferred Bernie over Hillary, which they did, was because they were chasing boys. Even Bill Maher recoiled and was like, that's not okay to say. Thing is, the policies that Bernie was running on were actually more beneficial to women than Hillary's were, despite him usually speaking in terms of class, right? Like universal healthcare and universal childcare help me as a woman more than the president being a woman who explicitly isn't running on either of those things. And we understand that, right? Because we understand the intersectionality between class and marginalized communities, which is why I find it ironic when people say things like this.
Bernie Sanders doesn't understand the intersectionality between class and fucking race, as he is representing Vermont. Like 99.99999% white people. So he doesn't know how to represent anybody other than fucking white people.
Talking about class issues in class terms does not ignore the intersectionality of it. Again, it turns out that even as recently as 2019, this whole Bernie bro narrative isn't actually accurate. The idea that his supporters are primarily from the bro demographic is wrong. Polling from around that time also showed that he was more popular among POC than among. So when Bernie is specifically asked about the 2016 primary and this idea or narrative that all of his supporters, or most of them, were bros that were running around being absolutely feral, he talks about how that is misinformation. It's true. Does that mean that no one who supported him was bad or a harmful person? Obviously not. Famously, some staffers at one of his campaign offices wrote a leaked letter alleging a dangerous dynamic of SV and SH. Specifically, they asked for a meeting with Bernie, his campaign manager, and other top staffers to help come up with a plan to mitigate this. Bernie and his team released a statement saying that they were going to rectify the issues and denouncing it. Let's talk about this idea that he started the whole Kamala Scepter way to the top thing. Cole seems to understand now, at least, that that is not true because he shifted to say that it was Bernie bros, which is still not great, but definitely not the same as Bernie Sanders starting it. When I reached out to Cole to ask him about this and asked him for a source, he sent me this tweet, as well as a Tomi Lahren one from a couple weeks later, who is credited with basically first pushing this idea. I will grant him that this self-described Bernie supporter tweeted this before Tomi Lahren did. I'm not sure if he was actually first. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I do think that ascribing an individual's behavior to an entire group is a little bit iffy, especially since there isn't any data that this caught on amongst Bernie bros. I checked out that guy's profile and he also pushes other pretty kooky ideas that are not at all popular with Bernie bros. In fact, when I was trying to find the source of this information, I actually got this, an article about how Bernie stands, renamed from bros, interestingly, were rallying behind Kamala and helping her gain footing in certain online spaces. He also came out and called her progressive and pragmatic, which I believe was an attempt to kind of bridge the gap. Obviously, none of that proves that Bernie Sanders isn't racist. But again, I want to talk about specific claims because those should be backed up.
So he has racial discrimination lawsuits against him?
This is also not true and pointed out to him in multiple comments. An organization that Bernie was one of the founders of called Our Revolution was sued by a woman alleging racial discrimination. Teslyn Figueroa alleged she was denied a promotion in retaliation for being vocal about discrimination. This was settled out of court and we don't know the details. I'm not trying to say one way or another what happened here, but it is worth noting that Our Revolution had been in the news previously and criticized for keeping her on board because she had made very public anti-immigration comments on Fox News talking about Trump's leadership on the travel ban and talking about being sick and tired of immigrants coming to the country and getting benefits. Had previously tweeted, please #build the wall, but the Our Revolution board stopped her from being installed as the group's chief of staff. But apologizing for her comments, she did question the motivation at the time. Also said, by the way, I'm Spanish. Even so, a previous board member had resigned, concerned that the group wasn't paying enough attention to Latino issues, basically saying that if anyone had espoused any other sort of anti-blank views, they would have been removed immediately. And of course, her anti-immigrant comments does not mean that Figueroa did not experience discrimination. Lastly, why do I think this edited clip is making the rounds and there's a sudden surge in half-truths coming out about Bernie? I don't know. But it is interesting to note that immediately before these comments, he had been talking for a much longer time about billionaires, super PACs, and money in politics, and criticizing not just the pro-is lobby, but also Republicans and Dems who had not come out strongly enough against is because of their donors. But that's not what's going viral, is it? Yes, you can criticize Bernie Sanders, but someone or someones don't want you looking any further than the half-truths. Or maybe it's just all one big coincidence.